as you can tell, I'm having a great morning because I get to just sit and have conversations with brilliant people who do fabulous things for our transport networks and for our cities and wider regions. And rather than me sort of like drone on about our guests, can I just ask each of our guests to introduce themselves to our fabulous audience?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. My name's Helen Godwin and I am the Mayor of the West of England, which, if you don't know where that is Bristol, Bath and all of the surrounding areas. So South Gloucestershire, City of Bristol and Bath and North East Somerset. And we have a relationship with North Somerset, which we're hoping to formalise soon.
A little bit nice.
That's me.
Thank you very much, Helen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jan Chaudhry van der Velde. I work for Transport for Wales. I've done 3 train company managing directors jobs at Merseyrail, then at West Midlands Trains, and then latterly at Transport for Wales Rail. But I am in semi-retirement now, so I am working 3 days a week for Transport for Wales, mainly on North Wales investment programmes.
I'm Claire Ward. I'm the very first Mayor of the East Midlands, and that is Nottingham, Nottinghamshire, Derby and Derbyshire, a population of nearly 2.3 million.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do this morning, we're going to have a conversation and we're going to talk about transport devolution, where, you know, it's not just about the big city region, but where, particularly with Claire, with Helen, you know, you're seeing combined authorities who've got a multitude of different needs that need to be served with transportation, but also where transport needs to be at the heart of those communities and that sort of growth. And with the fantastic experience that Jan has had around serving communities again, which cover a diverse set of needs. And so what I was just going to do is just look to explore about how devolution is transforming, but also how you want to think about those different challenges and those sorts of trade-offs that you make. And so the first thing that I was just going to sort of ask you all about is, you know, transport devolution. We've heard from Andy about the amazing, you know, sort of steps taken with a pace-setting sort of combined authority, many years in the making. But what I'm really interested in is, what has transport devolution enabled you to do that you would not have been able to do before? And maybe I could start with you there, Claire.
Well, the very first thing is to get a settlement of £2 billion as part of the city region transports, because we have been at the very bottom of the funding, both for revenue and infrastructure in the East Midlands for decades. And that settlement will really make a big difference to us. But it also allows us to think about transport on a regional basis. And we're very different from Andy and the big cities, most of the regions and the mayors that have come before us, because we have to manage 2 cities and large number of small towns and communities. And so devolution and transport will allow us to understand those needs in a way in which, quite frankly, Whitehall and Westminster have not been able to do at all.
Thanks, and Helen, you know, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a sort of similar geography, I suppose, in the sense that we're a lot smaller, so we're about probably half the population that Claire's got. But we have got 2 cities and then lots and lots of towns and villages, and quite a sort of diverse topography as well. So it's been, for us, that's the challenge. How do we serve everyone? What we've been able to do so far is to really start for the first time to have a sort of strategic programme that looks across the whole city region and accepts that, you know, Bristol is the kind of economic centre of that. So we do have to define our kind of transport infrastructure around how do we get people to work, how do we get people to hospital, how do we get people to schools. And we've been able to invest in our electric bus fleet that we wouldn't, you know, that's made a huge difference in terms of the confidence that people have in the buses, which are our primary source of transport. But we've also been able to do an awful lot of investment around rail, which I think it's not something in our region that you know, we don't really have a sort of commuter rail service, but we're really starting to build that now. So we've already opened 2 new stations. We've got 4 stations in development at the moment with plans for more. And so we're really starting to sort of change that mindset about what are the modes. And of course, starting on our journey towards mass transit, which any transport geeks will know that the Bristol story of mass transit is quite a woeful one. But we're now starting to come together for the first time actually as a whole region with one vision that we launched a couple of weeks ago, and being able to say, okay, this is where we're headed. Importantly, we are not talking about a specific mode at this stage. We've decided that we're mode agnostic, which is, a new way of looking at things, but it's enabling us to think about, okay, what is the problem that we're trying to solve in each place, and using our Transforming City Regions funding that Claire referenced, we're then able to say, okay, well, let's really delve into this and let's think about delivery of a proof of concept or something in a really short time period. And we absolutely wouldn't be able to do that at a council level.
And I think, sort of like the themes that you've pulled out there, very, very much like yours as well, Claire, which is, somebody many miles away does not know better about what the needs are, but also about how, community needs change over time, and that these are not cast in stone. And, I'm delighted we've got Jan here, because obviously, we can become quite England-centric quite quickly. But actually, in Scotland and Wales, we've got a very long-run history of what can happen when you devolve. And Jan, do you want to just sort of like give us a little bit of a share of the sort of experience in TFW that you've had and the kinds of things that you were able to do as a result of devolution, not central decision-making?
Well, I don't know how many people are aware, but in Wales, we've probably got the juiciest example of infrastructure devolution in the railways. I think there's only one part of the rail network which has been carved out and devolved properly in the last few years. In 2020, the Cardiff Valley lines were taken out of the rail network and were handed over to the Welsh Government. And we're talking ownership, and we're talking about operation, and we're talking about infrastructure maintenance and infrastructure enhancement. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I think the Cardiff Valley shows you what you can do with a properly devolved infrastructure in terms of the way you can enhance it, the way we've spent nearly £1 billion, or just over £1 billion now, on the electrification scheme, using a really modern, innovative, intermittent electrification system that combines the technology of fixed infrastructure with really clever trains that know when to raise pantographs to pick up electricity and when to lower them. And that means that we've been able to do a really good value for the public purse enhancement of the Cardiff Valleys. And if anyone's in the Cardiff area or the Pontypridd area, you'll see the brand new trains from Stadler that have been introduced. And I don't think we would have had the pace of that infrastructure enhancement had we not had the infrastructure devolved fully from 2020 onwards. And we work very closely with our partners, Amy Infrastructure Wales. I know Amy are here in great numbers today to make sure that that asset is looked after as well, if not better, than the rest of the rail network.
I'm sure that Amy will be delighted with the testimonial. I look forward to seeing it on their LinkedIn later, which is always great. But it's a really important example because there's a real visible change that comes when you can see that in the Cardiff Valley lines. And obviously, for communities, for your electorate, knowing there's a difference being made is so important. And Helen, sort of like what can people visibly see that means that, they can, in your communities, they know that it is more local decision making when it comes to transport?
Yeah, I think for us, the electric buses have been a really significant shift because we are a region that has always kind of been at the forefront of the climate change movement. We've got a green council in Bristol. So being able to demonstrate that, we understand that people want to breathe cleaner air, they want to move around the city on better transport that is cleaner, and having that investment has made a big difference. And it's kind of one of those things that, organically has happened, that there's a bit of a cult following for our green buses. People are gutted if they are on the bus stop and one doesn't turn up, and we've been able to sort of lean into that. The other thing that I have done, which I really do believe in, kind of making a visible difference to people's lives. I understand how long it takes to do big infrastructure projects, but I think rightly our residents, don't want to wait 10, 20 years to see visible change. So I think being able to really get to work on our stations at pace, that's surprising people actually, and so that feels really positive. We've also improved our bus infrastructure, so solar panelled, real-time information, those sorts of things that pop up and people kind of take notice. But I think probably the biggest thing is our decision to enable all kids to go free on our buses over the school holidays. So we did that last summer for the 6 weeks, and then we did it again at Christmas. We'll do it again at Easter. And we had 1.1 million journeys taken. And we got some data through last week which showed in our areas where the sort of lowest income areas, bus usage amongst young people went up by 250% during the summer. So for us, that's about the social change. That's about those kids whose parents are never taking them into town. Bristol has this reputation of being very cool, a bit of like a London to the west, a bit more laid back than London, but we've got pockets of real poverty. 35% of our kids in Bristol are living in poverty. So for us to be able to use devolution and to use that funding to make a real tangible difference during the summer holidays for families, I don't want to sort of underplay the significance of that. It's not hard infrastructure, but it's changing people's lives.
I mean, that's just a brilliant example of the power of local decision making great socio-economic choices, because you say opening opportunities for people who might not be able to afford to use the bus and what they can do during their school holidays. But there is also research over the years about the habit forming of public transport
Yes.
at an early age.
Yeah.
That if you get people using public transport early, they're more likely to use it as they get older.
And just as an anecdote to that, I've got 3 kids between 11 and 16, and my middle one, who's 14, they would just go busing. So they'd text each other, should we go busing today? And they'd just move around the city, going to places they'd never been. And now there's no anxiety for them about getting on the bus on their own or understanding the route or anything like that. They just do it now. So it has really changed the sort of culture amongst that age group as well.
And it is, I remember, when I was a kid and living in Manchester, you'd set yourself a challenge in the school holidays about how far could you get on the bus ticket, which is... And you can get very far.
You can get really far.
You can get really far. It is. And so, Claire, and in the East Midlands, what are the sort of visible, tangible things that your communities are seeing with devolution?
So obviously we're at the really early stages. We literally only took over the transport responsibilities a month ago, bringing the 4 transport authorities of Nottingham, Nottinghamshire, Derby and Derbyshire together under the East Midlands. But actually the one thing that has been a really tangible difference was something that I had promised in my manifesto, which was to give better support in travel for the young people who live on the borders of Greater Manchester. So I border with Andy's area, and young people living in places like Glossop were unable to access an FE college because there isn't one in Derbyshire at that end. And so most of those young people go to Stockport or into Manchester or to Macclesfield. And they were sitting next to kids who were benefiting from the very scheme that Andy was just talking about, where they have the hour pass. And so kids in my area were paying up to £800 a year to access that bus route to go to college. And kids in Manchester in the same class at the same desks were paying £10 and also had access. So I worked with very early on, in the first few months of being elected, we worked with Andy, with the bus companies, with Derbyshire County Council, and came up with a scheme that has allowed us to pay for 5 bus routes for those young people going to college. And that has meant for last August and the August before, for the first time, those kids, when they pick up their GCSE results, are able to make the decision about what's right for them and for their future on skills, not whether or not their parents can afford for them to go. And that is the most tangible example that I can give on transport, of why transport is so important. So we're at the really early stages, having just taken over transport, and we're already looking at what other places are doing. Helen's examples of what you do to build some resilience build understanding and opportunities for young people into transport and make it a more reliable service for people, but also one that's a bit more integrated. Because right now, too many of our people in the communities, in the small towns, they can't move between each other, let alone get in and out of the cities. They're not getting access to those opportunities.
I mean, an absolutely fantastic case study, I'm sure you'd all agree, and also an exemplar of actually transport-led growth for opportunity, which is those educational opportunities. We did some research about 18 months ago with 16 to 21-year-olds across the north, and the biggest barrier to entry they saw was not being able to access further education or training because they either A, didn't have a service, or B, couldn't afford it. So, even within a month, the momentum that you've got there is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant for those young people. I'm just going to move us on because I'm very conscious that I don't want to use up all of the time on just the first one or two questions. And I wanted to just think about the rural connectivity piece in particular, because we've touched on that less than some of the urban ones that we have. And, there's a whole thing about, is it easier to provide transportation in densely populated city regions, and there's all of those. But actually, what I'm interested in is, how do you align transport with housing, skills and economic planning when you've got both urban and rural areas to look at? And what are the sort of things that you are looking to do or looking to others' experience of to help in your thinking? And I don't know if you want to start with that one, Claire.
So we have just concluded our transport plan consultation. We've had huge engagement, 36,000 engagements with it, over 6,000 people actually completing the consultation documents. And mayors are a little bit competitive, so I just want to say we have absolutely blasted out the water any other consultations at that level. But because, people in the East Midlands have never had that opportunity to engage. And so it's so important that we do think differently about rural transport, and we think about how we are able to move people around an area to access the things that they need to access. So we have, demand responsive transport, but it's not really doing all the things we need it to do. We need to think about where the autonomous vehicle type for the future might come in. And I see Waymo had a car outside as we came in. Actually, when we're building new housing developments, what are the opportunities for autonomous vehicles to be collecting people and then taking them to a hub where there's opportunities for integrated transport? We are thinking about the fact that we've got 10,000 miles of roads in our region alone, and so many of those communities are cut off with no access to public transport on a Sunday or in the evenings. So we are in that transport consultation. We have had such a great response about what people think they need to be able to access those jobs and to be able to make it work for them. And buses are hugely important. And I've taken a decision that we are not starting with franchising. And we're a bit of an outlier on that, I recognise. But we are not Greater Manchester. We are not West Yorkshire. We're not South Yorkshire. And we have to do things the East Midlands way, which is to recognise that people need to move between those communities. And promising some people that I can deliver franchising when I've literally only just taken responsibility a month ago, halfway through my first term, that I can deliver franchising in that term. It is just, actually I think would be a bad sale to the public. What we really need to do is examine what we've got, make that work. It doesn't mean that the toolkit isn't there if we can't make enhanced partnerships. Government's given us more tools in that toolkit, but I think there is a lot we can do with the enhanced partnerships, and I really want to work with all our partners to deliver on that. And I think that particularly means we have to model it based on the type of region that we are, with so many small towns and communities, and not just great cities.
Yeah. And it is, sort of like it's it's such an important thing to always connect back to, isn't it? Which is ideas and tools can be transferred, but there is no cookie cutter solution for each and every, and actually you'll lose identity and lose connection with community if you try and impose something that doesn't work for them.
So I think what people need to understand about the East Midlands is that if you live in the High Peak, for example, your commute to work is more likely to be in Manchester or in Sheffield than it is to be in Derby or Nottingham. If you live in North Nottinghamshire, you're as likely to be looking to South Yorkshire or even to Lincolnshire than you are to Nottingham or to Derby. If you're in South Derbyshire, you may well equally look across the borders into Leicestershire or into Staffordshire. And so we are a very, very different region, and there is just not one solution that is going to suit all of those areas, and we have to make this work for the people who live there. So I can't just take the models from other mayors. I've got to learn a little bit and make it work for what is the right solution for our population.
And when we think about that as well, the explicit bit about transportation, Jan, within Wales, how has TFW helped that kind of economic social planning, but also, as Claire says, that Welsh identity that is so important?
So in Wales, what we found is that devolution just unlocks the door to a multimodal approach. And local transport is always about a multimodal approach, adopting the railways, active travel, bus routes, demand-responsive bus routes, bus priority measures and all the rest of it. So once you've got a good deal of devolution, you can start to take a multimodal approach. And we're on a very similar pathway, I think, to Transport for London, in that Transport for Wales started off as just a franchising authority for the devolved railway franchise in Wales and the borders. But what it's become over the last 10 years or so, coming up to 10 years, is that arm's length multimodal transport authority wholly owned by the Welsh Government. And that means that when we embark on things like bus franchising, which we'll be doing from next year and the year after, using the Welsh legislation that's just waiting for royal assent at the moment, or it's just received royal assent, then we can start to link up what we're doing on planning for trains, what we're doing in terms of the tram train network in the valleys that I mentioned earlier, and what we're doing in terms of demand responsive buses, which we do use a lot in rural areas. Our scheme is called Flexi, and we've got various pilots running at the moment, and we're just evaluating how successful they've been and how much public subsidy you need to tip into that. So, yeah, multimodalism is the key for Transport for Wales. You can't have it without a good deal of devolution, and we're on that same pathway, I think, to the one that Transport for London was on some years ago.
And that, it's such a great example, because it's that sort of, everyone's on a curve somewhere, and actually, trying to push up the curve too quickly also has its own risks and dangers. So, seeing what works, trialling things is such an important part of that sort of flexi model, the flexi pilot that you've got as well.
Yeah, and the local authorities and working with the local authorities will always be important, simply because they still have a lot of the powers, being a highway authority for everything except the trunk roads, looking after the bus infrastructure and so on. So there's still a need for collaboration. You can't control everything, but bus franchising will be a really interesting step forward, because Transport for Wales will be the directing mind for bus franchising in Wales, but a lot of the sort of funding sources that are going to come into the public sector pots are going to come via local authorities, and it's really important that local authorities underwrite the bus networks in their local council areas.
And, Helen, sort of like your experience as well, sort of like around that, thinking about the plan, thinking about how you integrate into the plan, but also the time that you take to take certain choices. What's your vision in the next sort of couple of years about how you're going to move forward in that?
Yeah, I think it's worth giving just a bit of context about our kind of devolution journey to answer that, because we've been an authority since 2017, but we have, I think it's really fair to say we haven't seized devolution in the same way that Andy, Steve, Tracy, who were all elected around the same time, have. And so we've got to all intents and purposes, an established authority, but we haven't really kind of been going for everything. So there's a bit of a kind of culture shift in terms of we can do this, we can move more quickly. There's a lot of pressure in my part of the world around franchising, and in a similar vein to Claire, we're not ready, and we also don't have the money to do it. So we are exploring how, for now, we can try and get the best possible enhanced partnership, but we're not taking franchising off the table. But I do think that when I think about those kind of two cities that we've got, Bristol and Bath are very, very different. They're connected by train, which is 12 minutes, which we don't make enough of. But they have very different identities, and then we've got all those towns and villages around. So people say to me, well, their kids go free is great, but what if you've got no bus? That's a fair comment. When we start thinking about mass transit, they will say, well, that's all very well, but we don't even have a bus. So we have to find, it's a very similar challenge, isn't it? We have to find a way in which we can offer something that probably won't be perfect in those rural areas, but is able to then connect into the mainline routes with decent interchanges. So that's where the trust point comes. Because if we're asking people to get on a demand responsive transport to join up with the main bus that goes from Wells to Bristol, say, they need to know that second bus is going to turn up. And ideally, imagine if they could wait somewhere where there's a loo. I mean, revolutionary, right? But, it's how do we make that network work? And I think the rail stations that we're building, they are primarily in kind of lower density areas. So again, it's how do we get people there safely? How do we make sure that our active travel plans are aligned with what we're trying to do? How do we make sure that micro-mobility, which is a big part of our culture now in terms of the e-scooters, they're expanding all the time. How do we make sure that is a safe and trusted mode that then can take people onto the next part of their journey?
Fantastic. Now, sadly, time has literally flown, and I've only got time for one more question. And I just want the three of you to just sort of think forward 5 years. Imagine you're back here in Manchester, the four of us are sitting here. And, with the devolution powers, with, what that's enabled you to do with transport-led growth, what's the thing that you want to be talking to me about that you're so proud that transport devolution has helped you do for your communities? Claire?
Wow. There is so much, but I think that we will have more provision in places. I think that our ticketing will be a better system, because at the moment ticketing is confusing, it's different wherever you live. Concessionary passes are completely different across the four authorities, so we'll have something that people understand. I think we'll have a bit more integration between some of those routes and buses and into trains and trams where we've got to. I think we will have made some initial decisions about our mass transit opportunities, and whether or not that is going to serve, the Trent Arc, as we call it, which is the area between the two cities, and what those opportunities are. And I think that for people, they will have more access to the digital technology that will help them. So, we've recently launched with our two cities the Ride app, and we're just before Christmas. It's had now 9,000 downloads, and it is getting rave reviews because it allows real-time information for people to plan their journeys. I think that will be, I hope, be rolling out a bit further across our region. And then finally, because I see him on the front row and I can't miss him, is that I hope we'll have made some progress on very light rail. 5 years, Darren, 5 years. I have to have made some progress on very light rail.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I'd like to illustrate that by picking out an example from North Wales. We've got devolved railways in Wales, running on Network Rail infrastructure. And in Merseyrail, we've got a devolved railway. It's been devolved since about 2003. The two funding authorities, are working really closely together. And this will be a real test of what can be done when you collaborate. So there is a Cinderella service, really, between Wrexham and Bidston at the moment. into the Merseyrail network, and there's a real opportunity to extend that from Bidston around the Liverpool Loop. So you're providing a link between Wrexham and Liverpool City Region, Liverpool City Centre for the first time using direct trains. We have got an officers' board running at the moment from both funding authorities. We're working closely with both Network Rail routes, Network Rail Wales and Network Rail North Western, and I think we're going to see some real progress on schemes like that that require both devolution and a good deal of collaboration. We've agreed 3 points of principle that we're going to develop the scheme jointly between Transport for Wales and Mersey Travel, or the Liverpool City Region as it's called now. We're going to invest in the capital expenditure for that scheme together on a joint basis, and we are then going to operate that service when it's ready to be operated on a joint basis as well. So it's a very specific example, but if you want to know what I'll be looking for in 5 years, I want to see projects like that come to fruition.
And that's a brilliant example because, again, we've heard yesterday and today about cross-regional importance. You've just talked about working with Andy. Steve talked about, the importance of Liverpool working with other regions as well. And who knows, if Wrexham get promoted, you might go and ask for some money to help with that. You could never know. And Helen, 5 years from now, what are you looking back at with pride?
Yeah, so I think for me, the bus network needs to be trusted. So I would love it if we were almost there with an all-electric fleet, if we had a really clear delineation between our kind of urban routes and our trusted rural routes, and that was kind of well integrated. I'd like to be getting towards a turn up and go service on our railways on some of the lines, so that there's that faith in a secondary sort of commuting option. And I also want us to be there, or very nearly there, with a proof of concept for our mass transit as well.
Fantastic. Well, I can't say thanks enough for the last hour, for joining us for these conversations, for joining us for conversations with political and industry leaders who care so much about community, but also understand just how great transport can be. And it can be in big schemes, but it can be in those small, quick decisions taken that just make it much easier for young people or older people to connect with either education or living the lives they want to live. So I hope you'll join me in a huge thank you for our brilliant panel this morning. Thank you.